It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. With me today, Conservative MP Siobhan Bailey, Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary Peter Kyle, Daily Telegraph Associate Editor Chris Hope and the editor of the Sheffield Star, Nancy Fielder. Today, the Prime Minister is still facing pressure after an official report criticises failures of leadership over Downing Street parties.
The Prime Minister is spending all of his time saving his own skin.
So what the Prime Minister ultimately wants is us to get back on with the job.
Cabinet ministers are staying loyal, but a former Prime Minister put the boot in.
Either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to number 10. Which was it?
As tension mounts on the Russia-Ukraine border, the Prime Minister heads to Kiev. And the battle of the highway code. Do cyclists need more rights? Let's start with reaction to the Prime Minister's statement to MPs yesterday. It was a pretty brutal session in the House of Commons for the Prime Minister. He said he would give a statement once he had received the report or update from the civil servant Sue Gray, who has been carrying out that investigation into lockdown parties. It wasn't the full Sue Gray report that we'd been expecting, but it was as much as could be published while the Metropolitan Police themselves investigate 12 of the 16 lockdown parties at Downing Street and Whitehall. Let's have a look at some of the papers and how they covered it on the front page. The Daily Express: yes, Prime Minister, you got it wrong, now get it right, as he said, and apologised for things they had got wrong at number 10. This is how the Mirror described it, the Gray Report fallout. 12 parties now probed by cops. 3 attended by the Prime Minister, 1 was in his own flat, 300 pictures handed over to the police, and still zero shame. The headline here in The Guardian: failures of leadership, Tories turn on Prime Minister over Gray Report. You can see Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, sitting there in the Commons watching Boris Johnson. And finally, the Sheffield Star, Nancy Fielder's paper: as Met investigates leaving do, is it time to quit? They're referring to the woman there on the front page, Kate Josephs, who is the former COVID task force chief, her leaving do before becoming the chief executive of Sheffield City Council. Back to the performance in the House of Commons by the Prime Minister. Siobhan, how did you judge Boris Johnson's performance?
Well, he was right to apologise again. This is a really, really serious issue. I mean, I'm completely fed up with the number 10 parties. It's not what I came into Parliament to be dealing with. It's not what my constituency want to hear about all the time. But we are in a situation now where Sue Gray's report was a non-report. Chris tweeted it was an update, and I think that was absolutely right. And unfortunately, I mean, it was a genius piece of civil serviceness for no fault of her own. I mean, she effectively, we're now creating a new department. We're going to have a souped-up civil servant, more bureaucracy, but it hasn't actually got to the root of the issue. And I think a lot of my sense is a lot of MPs, I include myself in this, are waiting to have the full facts before taking it's a really serious decision about what should happen with the Prime Minister about these parties. But notwithstanding that, he's doing a good job on so many other things. It's right to recommend.
Was it a comfortable watch?
No, and the masks have gone, so that's interesting now.
Peter, what did you make of the Prime Minister's performance?
I thought it was lamentable. I don't think he took any of the issues head on. His apology was not sincere. He constantly referred to we instead of I. He said that we have to keep waiting for another report. So it's not the Labour Party that's dragging this out. It is the Prime Minister and his behaviour that is dragging this out. And Dominic Raab, in that clip you just showed, he said that we need the government to get back to delivering. Get back. He's admitting that they're not doing it now, and they haven't been doing it for a while. The Labour Party 3 months ago released its cost of living programme. We've had the Living with COVID programme. You know, we've had programme after programme from the Labour Party. We are a government in waiting. We are releasing programmes. Just 2 weeks ago, David Lammy and John Healey, our Defence Secretary and our Shadow Foreign Secretary, were in Ukraine. Boris Johnson hasn't even visited Ukraine yet.
Although
you know, we're ahead of it. He's going, but he missed a call with Vladimir Putin.
We're going to discuss
They've dropped the ball, and there is an impact on delivery. And no Tory right now can say that they are putting country ahead of party, because if they're defending Boris Johnson, they're putting party ahead of the country.
All right, we're going to discuss whether delivery is being affected by what's going on. Chris, what about the tone of what Boris Johnson said? He did apologise at the beginning, but then he was pretty defiant. He was being attacked by his own side as well, of course, as by the Labour Party. Did he get the tone right?
Not really. It felt like sorry, not sorry. You know, a teenager might say to being caught out by a parent, that kind of thing. He didn't really feel he'd engaged properly with what he was apologising for, and that's what I think went down quite badly with MPs. He said to the MPs that she won the meeting last night at the 22 meeting, he talked about how he wanted to get rid of this vomit, this report, get it all out there. And yet, on the broadcast round this morning, we think maybe not all of the report might be published. These 300 photographs, which could be very damaging for the Prime Minister, they may never see the light of day. So I think there's a concern about what might get fully published. Even we say on our front page, publish the whole report and move on. But if he doesn't do that, he won't deal with it properly.
Now, he has said, of course, under pressure from former Chief Whip Mark Harper, to some extent, that the full report will be published, but as you say, we don't exactly know what that could look like. Right. Nancy, what about your readers? What do you think they made of the performance yesterday?
I think it looked like a man under pressure from his own team, and there's nothing he can really say to put it right, but he doesn't feel like he feels he needs to put it right. It's exactly what's just been said. He's been put on the spot like a small child, apologise, and you apologise, but you don't mean it. And everybody can see that, and this won't go away because people are still... So I had about 5 angry emails just in the last hour about people who couldn't go to funerals, who couldn't cuddle their mum. You know, that's not going to go away for anybody. And unless he actually admits what he's done, takes it seriously, and he knows what went on. He could solve this if he wanted to, and it could go away. But he's got to take us out of this no man's land where nobody really is winning either way.
In terms of striking the right tone, Siobhan, was it right for Boris Johnson to wrongly suggest that the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, chose not to prosecute Jimmy Savile while he was the Director of Public Prosecutions as part of what he was saying in the Commons?
Listen, I disagree that the Prime Minister doesn't feel deeply sorry for everything that's happened and doesn't take responsibility. I think he does, and I think he wants to put right. He's already made allowances. I mean, I'm not going anywhere near. I don't know enough about any of that you just said. I think, but I think.
Can I say he took a crank conspiracy theory from the darkest sewer of the internet, and he brought that conspiracy theory into the House of the House of Commons, the centre of Parliament, the centre of our democracy. It was disgraceful, and it shows how he debases our politics.
Well, let me just show you this tweet from the former Chief Whip, Julian Smith. The smear made against Keir Starmer relating to Jimmy Savile yesterday is wrong and cannot be defended. It should be withdrawn. False and baseless personal slurs are dangerous, corrode trust, and can't just be accepted as part of the cut and thrust of parliamentary debate. Do you agree with that?
Listen, I think I'm actually really interested to hear from Chris because he's itching to talk. But I think, you know, yesterday...
Was it appropriate for that?
Yesterday absolutely had to be focused on the issue at hand with the Sue Gray report. You know, the personal things that get thrown around in politics is something I try and avoid. Nobody's perfect. But I think we have to get back to what yesterday was all about. I do think he felt incredibly sorry and he wants to move on. He wants to get all the facts in front of MPs. We will then make a decision, and I think that's important.
I mean, is it part of the cut and thrust, that sort of personal slur? I mean, the fact check by Reuters concluded there is no evidence to suggest that Keir Starmer, then Director of Public Prosecutions at the Crown Prosecution Service, was directly involved in the decision not to prosecute Jimmy Savile. And was it appropriate for the Prime Minister in this session?
So Starmer apologised for shortcomings in investigating child abuse claims, and that came in an inquiry into the Savile affair. So that's what happened in 2013. Whether he's right to raise that in House of Commons and debate about Partygate is definitely disputed, and it looked like he was back against the wall. I think Keir Starmer was really effective yesterday in holding Johnson to account. Tory MPs listened very closely to what he was saying, unusually, I think. I think bringing it in at that point was clunky. but it wasn't wrong to say that there were apologies from Keir Starmer and his DPP over shortcomings over Savile.
Is Boris Johnson still on notice until the Metropolitan Police publish their report and we have the rest of the Sue Gray report in the way that Steve Baker, your colleague, said?
I think that's probably right. I mean, I do, as I said, I think the sense is there's a lot of people waiting to have all the facts because of the seriousness of what's happening. But I think there is still a lot of support for the Prime Minister in terms of what he's achieved and what he's trying to do and the programme that we've got going at the moment. And that makes it a difficult issue. And that, a lot of constituents, I know the Labour Party, it's your job to keep this going and to talk about it, but a lot of constituents are starting to say, come on now, you're going to move on to Ukraine, we've got levelling up, we've got the country.
Very clearly, the Labour Party is desperate to move on from this. We are rolling out our programme of policies. We are desperate to move on from this. But our point is, we cannot move on with it with Boris Johnson. He moves from the disaster of the CBI speech to the next set of lies that he gives, and then suddenly there's another set of issues where he dominates, and it's about his character, his incompetence, what he did, what he said. All through the COVID period, we were having all of this mess about his private life and about his decorators and about use of money and his holidays. As soon as this finishes and we can move on and we have the Gray report, we will move to the next thing, because Boris Johnson will never change. He can never change.
The Labour Party, with their checkered history of recent leaders,
we sorted it out, Siobhan. It's your turn now.
Ultimately, we've got the democratic elected Prime Minister of this country. We are having a full investigation called for by your side.
Criminal investigation.
Into what? It's super serious. I totally accept that, and people are right to be angry, but it's also right to get all the facts in front of us before things can move on.
Nancy, do you agree with that there'll be many people reading your paper who will feel it is time to have all the facts before you make a final decision? Or do you think people would just like this whole thing to go away and move on?
I think on your first point, people feel that the people who are leading our country, some of whom are at these parties, know the facts. So actually they're waiting for anger to die down. They're pussyfooting around. The Met didn't want to investigate. As soon as the information is about to come out, they didn't want to investigate. I think people see this for what it is, and it's people in power using their power to get away with what they've done. And I think people do want to move on, but they actually think there should be some justice in it. And the justice isn't going to come through the Met, is it? Because these aren't charges of murder or rape or anything horrendous. They are fairly minor things. But normal people had a fine on the spot. Why on earth would it take so long unless there were things to hide and complications to stop behind the scenes? It just doesn't need to take this long, and they're deliberately doing it. So I think that's actually adding to the anger. Right. People do want to move on, but how can we? It's been deliberately created, so we can't.
Let's have a look at the Snap poll. One of them, Savanta Comres, a new Partygate Snap poll. 65% do not accept Prime Minister's apology yesterday. 69% want him to resign. The fate of the Prime Minister, though, Chris, is in the hands of his own MPs. What is the mood in the party? Was there any sense of movement yesterday? We heard Andrew Mitchell, another former Chief Whip, saying, you've lost my support.
That was usual suspects, I think.
Yeah, you've lost my support. We had Aaron Bell, Tory MP, saying or asking the Prime Minister whether he was or had been made a fool of what happened. What do you sense the mood is?
Andrew Mitchell was following his local party, which unanimously voted a concern about Partygate. I think what was quite interesting last night was a tweet from Gary Sambrook, who's a senior person on the 1922 committee, and he was saying how he'd come round and he used the word love in relation to Boris Johnson, saying he'd come back on side with what Johnson's trying to do. I mean, clearly there's an operation by the Praetorian Guard of people around Boris Johnson trying to sort him out. The biggest cheer last night for the meeting that Siobhan was at was for news that Linton Crosby might be coming back. He was big in 2013, 2014, he told David Cameron to strip the barnacles off the boat, and I think a lot of Tory MPs want the barnacles to disappear. That means woke policies, that means green fluff, all the stuff which is slowing down and stopping people see what the Tory party should be about, which is tax cutting mainly and being strong on immigration.
None of that can make up for a bad Prime Minister. You can't shuffle the chairs around the Titanic on this one when the ship is going down. If you've got a bad Prime Minister, you can have all the advisers you like, but you're still going to make the bad mistakes.
He's got a massive mandate.
He's got a mandate, but he's misusing it. And actually, our constitution is quite clear on this. You know, the first among equals. Where is Rishi Sunak right now? Where's the rest of the cabinet right now? All of these people are either hiding or they're defending the indefensible. Nobody is standing up. Churchill established the principle, very clear, accepted by all parties: country first, constituency second, party third.
Well,
right now, the Tory party has slipped so much that it is party first and it is country last, party second and party third. You know, until the country see that the MPs, backbench MPs, are starting to think about the country, then they are never ever going to come back to the Tory party.
The onus is being put on you, isn't it, Siobhan? Not you personally, but you and your colleagues.
I think it's, take the responsibility, that's where we are. But I think it's unfair to say that we're not putting country first and constituency first. We all know what a change of leader would do in terms of changing ministers, the paralysis that comes with that. It is something...
So you should have stuck with Neville Chamberlain in the run-up to the Second World War. I mean, how far has the Tory party sunk?
We've got a country that is climbing out of COVID at the moment. We've got the Ukraine. We've got everything going on.
Well, so let's get a great Prime Minister who can see us through it. Why make the argument we're facing serious problems, therefore have a useless Prime Minister who is incompetent and corrupt?
I'm making the argument that it's unfair to attack the Conservatives that want to think carefully about this decision and think carefully about what's happening at the moment.
It means nothing as long as we've got Boris Johnson.
You have mentioned that actually the Prime Minister is distracted from other very key issues, including Ukraine. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is on his way there for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. James Landell, the BBC's diplomatic correspondent, is there for us in Kiev. One of the things that happened yesterday as a result of giving a statement in the House is that the Prime Minister missed a call with Vladimir Putin. What's happened?
Well, after that happened, Downing Street said, well, it's still going to happen at some point. It's merely been postponed. It will probably, we hope, to happen tomorrow, i.e. today. All the signs are from today is that the Russians have not agreed to reschedule that call today. In the meantime, you know, President Macron last night snuck in a second call with President Putin. So that British engagement with the Russians is not happening as planned. The Prime Minister is, we understand, at least until he gets on a plane and comes, I'll believe it when I see it, on his way here at some stage. He's not bringing the Foreign Secretary with him because she's got COVID, so she's staying. She had a whole schedule planned. That's not now happening. But he will be coming. He will be not the only Western leader here. The Dutch Prime Minister, the Polish Prime Minister's here, and they're all here just to sort of show support for Ukraine by their physical presence and not just, you know, offering money or support on a military front elsewhere.
James, what does Boris Johnson expect to achieve that others, such as President Biden, NATO and the EU, can't?
Well, I wouldn't think that he wants to achieve anything different. I think he wants to physically be here just to actually talk to President Zelensky of Ukraine face to face, just to understand his perspective. Because there is a slight gap between, you know, some of the talk in Washington and London and what's happening here in terms of what's happening. In the West, they have the full benefits of all their intelligence services and they're seeing in very close detail precisely the build-up of Russian troops. And they're saying all of this looks like an imminent invasion. In Ukraine, where they've lived with conflict for, you know, many, many years now. If you're just behind me, that wall there, I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
That is some of the 13,000 people who have died since 2014, right? And so for Ukraine, it's not a question of whether there's going to be a conflict, it's whether that conflict is going to escalate. And Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, is just concerned that the language might be exacerbating the situation and making it a conflict somehow a self-fulfilling prophecy, and at the same time damaging the economy. So that's the balance that he and Boris Johnson have got to sort of get right between preparing for a potential conflict, but also not exacerbating it by raising the rhetoric and encouraging tensions to build up.
Interesting. Thank you very much. James Landell there in Kiev. Let me just go back to what James was saying at the beginning and show you this headline in The Guardian. Boris Johnson rebuffed in bid to play key role in Ukraine diplomacy. Kremlin rejects number 10 request to reschedule Putin call that was cancelled so the Prime Minister could face Partygate questions. I mean, if there was any doubt in your mind, Siobhan, about whether the Prime Minister is able to focus 100% on a critical issue like Ukraine, there it is.
Well, listen, the Prime Minister is able to juggle many, many balls. That's what
Yeah,
Prime
but he
Ministers.
didn't make the call
That's
with
what Prime
Putin.
Ministers do. The whole government is engaged and very, very concerned about Ukraine. I don't think there should be a political football that is it becomes an attack dog. Ben Wallace has been incredibly strong on this. Has given a very good speech recently. We've sort of done the 2,000 tank missiles that were really well received by the Ukraine, to the point where there was reports that God Save the Queen was trending. The Ukraine, they know they have our support, and the government, the Prime Minister, Defence Secretary, Foreign Secretary, everybody's working on this.
Now, do you agree with that, Peter? I mean, it's not just about the Prime Minister. We saw Ben Wallace there holding a very long conference over the response to Ukraine, and the British government's been praised from various quarters about its robust stance.
And when the British government get it right, we are supportive of them. In the statements in the Commons, we've been absolutely bending over backwards to be supportive, because Putin needs to see a united Britain on this. He needs to see that Britain is actually, all of its political parties are lined up to make sure that a clear message goes to Putin. There are a couple of things that need to get better, though. Missing that call with Putin yesterday was inexcusable, because Putin only responds to two things. He responds to steel, resolution, and he responds to a united West. And that means we need to make sure that Boris Johnson isn't just missing calls with Putin, that he is taking really seriously the making sure we're building the coalition, strengthening the NATO allies. The Labour Party stands absolutely fulsomely behind NATO and our allies in NATO, because that is the kind of thing that Putin responds to. He responds to nothing else. And just a quick point. Boris Johnson has become a figure of ridicule within our own country because of the way he's handled recent events and other events. He is becoming a figure of ridicule within Russia as well, and Putin is playing this. Now, the machine, and a propaganda machine that he is very effective at, is pumping out all this sort of stuff. And you see how it's being reported, that missed call in Russia. It is a very different story to this idea he's getting on here. It is weakening our resolve, and it is weakening our ability to actually be taken seriously by Putin.
Labour could back off and let us get on, wait for the Met report, stop the constant singing and dancing about it. But in any event, it's completely the wrong premise. We have got a very, very clear position on supporting Ukraine. We've got a very, very clear position on working with other countries to do so. Putin knows that, the Ukraine knows that, and that's the important thing. And the next stages are obviously crucial.
Right.
That's a very clear message. The message is the Labour Party shouldn't be holding the government to account. That actually Boris Johnson, it isn't that Boris Johnson shouldn't be acting responsibly. It is that the Labour Party shouldn't be actually talking about it. I think that is a very, very strange, set of affairs.
Carl and the Labour Party, because actually on this issue, the former Chief of the General Staff, Lord Dannett, has said that Boris Johnson's diplomatic efforts risk being undermined by the Partygate time bomb, as he calls it. He says, I think Boris Johnson is in a very precarious position. And if, as the Prime Minister of this country at a time of international crisis, and we are a powerful country, but our leadership is flawed, then the West is weakened.
If it wasn't Ukraine, it'd be something else. I mean, there's no question that Boris Johnson has to get the team around him right, and that's not what's happened. If you look at how he ran City Hall, quite a successful London mayor, 2016, with a good team around him. That's what I think a lot of MPs tell me they want to see around him. If it's not Ukraine, as I say, it'd be something else, some other global crisis to have to deal with, and therefore get a team around him that can help him to see clarity and provide assurances to our rivals that we have got some steady leadership here.
I mean, there is an expectation, Nancy, that governments can do more than one thing at the same time. But what is your reaction to this idea that Boris Johnson can't be giving 100% to issues like Ukraine, or levelling up for that matter, coming on tomorrow with the White Paper, when he has and is still in the middle of Partygate?
Well, I was speaking to one of our readers earlier who isn't an expert in politics, and we were talking about Ukraine, and I said, look, I'm no expert in Ukraine. And he turned around and he said, but you probably know more than our Prime Minister. And actually, that is generally the response you get now. He's just been completely undermined. That was actually somebody who voted, a Labour voter, turned to the Conservative Party last time. And people are furious about this. I mean, levelling up hasn't gone exactly how it was promised. Sheffield, every time we get something, we have to do an awful lot of work to uncover, is this something that's been given before? And it's quite hard for somebody, myself, whose job it is to understand these things, and we have to pick through. It just feels like there's a huge amount of distrust, and we don't want, it's not good for the government or the Prime Minister to be a national joke. And that feels like where we're at on most subjects now, because Partygate always comes first.
You're nodding away there, Chris.
Well, it's very hard to work out, and you're totally correct there saying how hard it can be to work out what is new money, what is old money, and we'll be trying to work out in tomorrow's white paper what is actually new and what isn't, and what's re-announced and what isn't. So that's a massive concern for journalists. But, you know, we don't want any small violins for us. We're doing our best here.
Well done, you. Peter, back on Ukraine. Some of the response has also been around the freedoms that the UK have had to introduce tougher sanctions. Now we're no longer part of the EU. The former US ambassador to the EU, Anthony Gardner, tweeted this: new UK sanctions legislation, if approved, might be a major Brexit upside if more flexible than current restrictive EU sanctions rules. We know that the Foreign Secretary yesterday, Liz Truss, put out lines saying that they would go further. Do you agree that we have more freedom to introduce those tougher sanctions?
Well, if we do have those freedoms, then they should be looked at very, very closely. I mean, we want to make sure that Putin is faced with an absolute resolute Britain, the British government, British Parliament, when it comes to his behaviour internationally and the way that he destabilises, not just through threats on borders, but also his use of very, very destabilising fake news and other operations that he does. It is essential that we work really closely as an international community, as an allied West, in the face of this. But Britain has a very specific problem, and that's because of the amount of Russian money that comes into Britain, particularly into London. Yeah. We see this also seeping into our politics, and particularly on the Tory side. So we do need to make sure that we clean up this, and we need to hit Putin where it hurts.
And do you agree being out of the EU could allow the UK to do that? I mean, Liz Truss said yesterday from the department, under the current sanctions regime, the 2019 Russia sanctions EU exit regulations, the UK has only been able to sanction those linked to the destabilisation of Ukraine. But now the UK will be able to go further.
Well, I'm somebody who wants to make the absolute most of our position as we find it now and not rerun the arguments of the past. We need to rebuild from the rubble of a bad Brexit deal. And where we do have freedoms, we need to use them, and we need to make sure that they are used wisely.
You do accept it?
Where we do, I don't. No, I need to see. I honestly, I don't know the legal position of that particular freedom, and I'm not trying to be evasive here, because if we have freedoms, we have to use them. We've got to use them for the benefit of all of Britain, and particularly our economy. And we've got to sort out the problems that we have a 10-mile queue in Dover to try and get out of the country and get our goods and trade out. So we need to rebuild from the rubble of the bad Brexit deal. But where we do have freedoms, of course we should be using them. We should be maximising them and creating also additional opportunities for our country. That they are there, but not currently as they're being negotiated.
Can I just mention one other thing that changed? The U-turn on making vaccinations mandatory for frontline healthcare staff in April. That is now not going to happen. Did you, Siobhan, back the policy in the first place? And do you now back the U-turn?
I did reluctantly back I voted for the NHS. I mean, we've come to the right decision. I'm really glad. I was really reluctant about particularly the NHS vaccinations, but I backed it because I'd voted in favour of the care sector having compulsory vaccinations. And so I'm really pleased to where we've got to now, but I am quite sad that we did not listen to the same arguments and the same voices in the care sector. However, having spoken to the Minister and the ministerial team, listened to the statement yesterday, this is about a change in the situation with Omicron. It's actually a changing government approach to COVID as well. And, you know, I welcome all of that.
Right.
So not negative, but... and I've got
but you backed the policy even though you weren't really in favour of it, but now you back the U-turn because it's the right place.
I think, well, we've had a definite shift in complete COVID policy. I mean, I've got a doctor that was writing to me, absolutely crippled with desperation, that was about to lose his job. So this has been very serious for lots of people. And I think
the government only voted it through in December with the support, of course, of the Labour Party. I'll come on to whether you supported the original policy or the U-turn. I mean, this does look like a government that
I think we'd be in a much worse place as the government wasn't willing to change when the facts change and change when they see a different approach. And they're taking a very different approach to COVID, and I think that's through a lot of work by a lot of backbenchers and a lot of data.
The former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has called the reversal completely wrong and said it left the NHS with the worst of all worlds of a retreat on patient safety plus damaged government credibility. But what about the Labour Party's credibility? You presumably backed, well, I know you did back the policy along with the Labour front bench. Do you back the U-turn?
I do. I agree with much. I agree with much of what Siobhan has said, except the fact that she regrets voting for it in the first place, because actually the evidence was very clear at the time, and all the way through COVID, we've had to make very difficult decisions based on the evidence of the time.
Yeah, but it wasn't very long ago.
what's changed is Omicron. I mean, we've only learnt the word Omicron just shortly before Christmas, and the evidence of how Omicron has unfolded. But also, we've looked at the examples of Wales. Wales got 97% vaccination in the NHS, and they didn't use mandatory. So we have evidence we didn't have before. So you have to move with the evidence, and I'm not embarrassed about changing my mind when the circumstances change.
Right, although I don't remember you calling for it before the U-turn was actually performed. Nancy, how would you feel, and would you be happy for your family to be treated by an unvaccinated NHS worker?
The state of the NHS and the long waiting lists, I think you'd be happy to treat it by anybody just to get treated. I know so many people who have had really serious NHS problems, who've waited at home with broken hips for 12 hours, then laid on trolleys for 3 days. This NHS cannot afford to lose one more person, and I'm fully for the vaccines. But actually, we've got the NHS. Somebody somewhere in power has put the NHS in this awful situation. It's been exacerbated but not created by the pandemic, and we have got to look after the people who are there. If that means education rather than forcing some injections, I think that's the right way forward.
Right, the politics of this, Chris, hope
it's not easy, is it? But it's a moving enemy. I feel sorry for you. You have to defend your position on this. Omicron is a difficult thing to fight, and I think they've come to the right decision. I mean, the big issue of forcing NHS workers out of the service when there's these huge backlogs obviously outweighed everything else.
All right, we're going to talk about something completely different, because over the weekend, changes to the Highway Code were introduced. You may not, or you may be aware of that. The government says it's clarification and refining the existing rules, which will enhance safety for all road users. But not everybody is in favour. Let's talk to Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, one of the groups meeting to make a plan to try and have the updated rules scrapped. What's wrong with them, Howard?
Thank you for having me on. I thought lunatic asylums had gone for good, but that was until I read the Highway Code. The latest modifications to the nation's traditional road user safety manual must have been authored by an asylum inmate. They are not only dangerous and counterproductive. Mark my words, and you can have me on here again in 6 months' time, they will unquestionably risk more lives too.
Which bits particularly are you talking about? Because the government says this is just really refining what's already there or making it clearer.
Well, one of the biggest problems, and there's 3 or 4 of them, but one of the biggest one is the cyclists now have the right of when a vehicle is turning left or right at a junction, that could be a 40-ton truck, it could be a car, a cyclist coming up behind has the right of way to go straight on. That cannot be right. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's very, very dangerous. And we didn't need to change it before, because everyone should be looking after their own safety and checking and acting with due care and consideration.
Peter?
I disagree. I think the problem here is the fact that it just came out of nowhere. Grant Shapps hasn't said a thing about this for 2 months. We could have actually warmed the country up to this and had a discussion, and so people understand these. But I don't think anybody would, not many people, would think that if you've got a 40-ton truck going along and a cyclist going alongside it, that it's acceptable for the 40-ton truck to turn left. I think it does reflect the reality of where we are. If it's a car, you know, it could be a cold, wet, rainy day and you've got somebody sitting in a nice, warm car. I think it's OK to just slow down and allow the cyclist to either carry on going forward or turn left. I think it responds to the needs that our road use is changing, the space on roads is changing, and also there are more cyclists and people using other modes of travel right now, and people just have to be respectful of that. It doesn't mean that we do something that's completely profound and road users suddenly are, you know, plunged into long tailbacks. We've got to be sensitive about how we move forward. But these highway code changes seem very reasonable to me.
Howard?
Absolutely, totally disagree. The highway code assumes that every driver is a homicidal maniac. Peter, you just made the point about, you know, we should slow down. People were doing that anyway. But what's going to happen now, and it's happening already, and the Mail Online picked it up yesterday, loads of cyclists just going straight on and ignoring people turning left. I always look in my mirror. I'm always careful. 99% of drivers are good and 99% of cyclists are good. But the militant cyclists, which seems that Grant Shapps has listened to, are taking over their roads. We're losing our in terms of cycle lanes, and they don't even have to use cycle lanes anymore. They can just use the main road. If the cycle lane's on the road, they can ignore it, and that's in the highway code.
Right, but do you agree with what Peter is saying, that road use is changing? There are many more cyclists. The changes include the introduction, it says, of a hierarchy of road users, which the government says to ensure quicker or heavier modes of travel, cars, vans, lorries, have the greatest responsibility to reduce the danger or threat they may pose on the road. Howard?
That has always been there, enshrined in the previous highway code. If you drive dangerously, whether you're a cyclist or a trucker or a taxi driver or a motorist, you should be absolutely penalised for the full extent of the law. This is taking away common sense and allowing... I'm not blaming all cyclists, please, I cycle myself. And pedestrians now, one of those things to do, they can just walk off the curb without looking. And a poor old driver, if he hits them, he's going to get the blame. And the same with the cyclist. In any altercation with a cyclist, the cyclist will always be seen as innocent.
Siobhan, do you have sympathy with what Howard's saying?
I'm glad he's challenging, because I think this needs to be constantly under review, because things are changing. My cyclists, I run a cycling summit, they're very pleased about these changes. Actually, in the hierarchy, it's very clear that this doesn't remove responsibility from any road users, and actually talks about cyclists being more respectful and understanding of pedestrians, because we know some pedestrians, particularly on country roads, feel overrun sometimes with especially the lycra fast people. But But one thing I do want to... I mean, I've had quite a few of my haulage, my truck drivers be in touch. They are really worried. I mean, we brought a massive truck to one of my schools, Westminster Primary School, and we lined the children up in front of the truck to show how far away it is before the truck driver has visibility. So that has not changed. I am aware, I'm aware that everybody is focused on safety with these new rules, but we cannot take our eye off the ball that, there are some vehicles on the road that will need specific care and attention around, and especially when you're on the foot or on a bike.
Right. I mean, by the way, do you think enough communication was done about this? I mean, lots of people I've spoken to didn't even realise.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of following it because of my I've got a really sort of keen cycling and walking constituency. So yeah, it wasn't something that wasn't a shock.
Do you think Howard is right, Chris, that the government's been captured by what he would probably call militant cyclists?
Motorists feel always under siege. They pay the road tax. Cyclists don't. They're a bit annoyed about this shared space issue. But Peter's right, I think. It's being more aware of your surroundings. It's not a contested space, a road. It should be one that we all share and get along with and drive carefully and cycle carefully.
Well, Nancy, I don't know if you are a cyclist, but some of the other bits of the guidance is for cyclists to ride in the centre of a lane on quieter roads, in slower-moving traffic and as they approach junctions in order to make themselves as clearly visible as they can. And motorists have been encouraged to adopt what's called the Dutch reach, which is opening the door next to them but with the opposite hand, so you're forced to look over your shoulder as they do so before they open the door for cyclists and pedestrians. Common sense or gone too far?
I think a lot of it is common sense, but I think the key to this problem is actually we need more people out of their cars. But we never do it in a way that motorists agree with. And I hate the way cyclists and motorists, and most people are actually both, are just pitted against each other all the time. Anytime something changes, it always turns into cyclists versus motorists. And we have got to get people out of their cars. We've got to find ways to make the roads safer. We've got to protect the lives of cyclists who are not safe in Sheffield, as they're not in most places around this country. So I just think we need to really work on how we can do it without everybody hating each other. I know it was said briefly earlier, but it's just such a divisive issue and it doesn't need to be.
Howard, you were nodding away there.
Well, I'm glad to hear this thing, because we want to get rid of this division. This consultation to produce this highway code consists of 21,000 responses. 16,500 came from the cycle lobby. I didn't know anything about this consultation. I wasn't asked it, and I run one of the most successful driving campaigns in terms of public affairs.
Yeah.
I'm teamed up with the Alliance of British Drivers and the Motorcycle Action Group. We want safe roads, and I don't accept this thing, we've got to get people out of their cars. Why? Why can't we drive our car? Why don't we have the choice? Why are we made to feel guilty and we contribute the 5th largest income to the Treasury every year, but yet we are the ones that are most penalised and demonised?
Nancy, why?
Well, because the planet's burning and we've got a climate catastrophe, and if people use public transport or cycles, it would be better for the world.
I don't think we have to get people out of their cars. We have to make an alternative that is attractive and is usable and reflect it. And I think, people do feel they're being... During COVID, we had lots of cycle lanes in my constituency which were really successful. There was one that was not, and it was on a main artillery road. And it had right the way down temporary cycle lane, temporary cycle lane, temporary cycle lane. And then we found out that the consultation for it had been overwhelmingly against it, had becoming permanent. The Green Council sort of used all sorts of shenanigans to get it through and make it permanent. I came out against it simply because the community that's affected wasn't consulted, and there were huge tailbacks, including emergency services. So in those circumstances, it's difficult to take a position, and it becomes a sort of, a really controversial and creates a huge amount of unnecessary heat. The space between homes and houses and shops is changing and evolving. We have to evolve with it in a way that takes people with us.
Was it a mistake not to have more people involved, like Howard Cox, in the consultation?
I wasn't involved in the consultation. I mean,
you heard 16,000 or what it was out of 21,000 were cyclists.
I know we were aware of it locally. I mean, I think ultimately, I think Howard's right to say that nobody should be made feel guilty about their chosen mode of transport. We're also right to say that people, want to be walking and cycling more, and that the pandemic did open up those opportunities because there was fewer cars on the road. But it's a safety issue for all road users, and this is just one part of it. But I think we need to keep everything under review, and particularly because of our haulage companies that are really, really concerned.
Final thought from you, Howard?
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm actually backed by the Road Haulage Association, and they're very worried that pedestrians and cyclists are going to be in peril because of the misinterpretation of these recommendations and laws. We've written today, or in fact yesterday, to Grant Shapps, demanding a meeting to talk this through and involving us with the solutions. We want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, and we want better safety on roads. We're right behind that. So please understand that.
All right. Thank you very much, Howard Cox. Siobhan, you're saying this is advisory.
This isn't law. This is advisory. There's no fines. So again, this is about boosting kind of everybody.
Might that make it more confusing?
To think a little bit more carefully about how they're raising the.
All right. We've run out of time, but thank you very much, Howard Cox, for being with us. We're going to talk briefly before the end of the programme. You mentioned it, I think, first of all, Chris and Peter, on levelling up. Let me just show the front page of Nancy's paper at the start, Sheffield Star. Levelling up funding. Sheffield set for share £1.5 billion brownfield fund for regeneration, because we've got the long-anticipated levelling up white paper coming out tomorrow. What do you make of this? Good news for Sheffield?
It is good news for Sheffield, and we do really need the North to be invested in as it should be, so it can contribute, so the whole of the country's economy can be as strong as it possibly can be, because we all know it can't be when massive chunks of the country are held back. So this is good news. But I think there's a lot of scepticism about what's been promised. Until we see these new houses built, and we see them built in the right place, and we see them done in the right way, I think there is always scepticism. And there's such big sums of money and so lacking in detail. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you think you've got a big announcement and actually you've had it just split 3 different ways a few months earlier.
Right. A big announcement tomorrow. Will it amount to much?
Well, it should do. I mean, it should define what Johnsonism is. An idea that emerged before the election in 2019 and hasn't yet been defined even by his own department for a bit. So now we know what it is. It's basically being proud of where you are, being based where you are. People in Sheffield should stay in Sheffield, don't come to London, stay there, work there, live a life there. That's the point of it. Good idea. But whether the proof's in the pudding tomorrow when Michael Gove announces it, and so far I've been underwhelmed by the idea that a local authority shake-up is hardly going to set the heather alight.
Underwhelmed, says Chris.
I mean, there's so much work been going on. It isn't the case that the money hasn't been flowing out. We've seen so many high street regenerations. There's been bids last year that were successful. I mean, I looked to the think tank Onward, who have been writing reports about levelling up. They wrote an excellent report about the sense of belonging. And I think that's, I mean, I grew up up north in Yorkshire, and I get that there is a lot of places that have genuinely feel left behind. The southwest it has many of the same demographics. And I know where the politics is, but we cannot forget about the rest of the country. So levelling up is for the whole of the country. I think it's the right ambition. I think it's right to go after and look after the people that have felt left behind.
Any investment that's going into communities is something that we celebrate. And it's a good thing. We've got Labour councillors and MPs who are fighting to get this money into their communities because it's needed. But let's not kid ourselves. In none of these areas where levelling up funding is going, is the levelling up money matching the money that's been taken out of public services, even in the period since Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister. This is not fresh investment. This is a refund for some of the money that's been taken out, and the refund doesn't even match what has been taken out in the first place. So yes, it's good, but the refund is going into a lot of bricks being built. We need skills as well. We need investment in communities and people. Don't forget the people. It's not all about bricks.
We've got bills, we've got skills bill legislation.
Schools funding is way down.
We will judge when the bills are presented to us. But until then, we'll be covering more on this tomorrow. Thank you to all of my guests for today. Bye-bye.